Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. If I can steal a trick from Frank Luntz, the visiting academic fellow at the CPS, if anyone in the audience has an empty seat next to them, can you please put your hand up? And if anyone at the back who wants to a closer look at the Foreign Secretary, please make your way to the front, or indeed stand by the sides, because there is a lot of space. Come on, people, don't be British about this. It's Liz Truss. One brave soul. No. That's no. Be a little British. Thank you. Okay, thank you all so much for joining us, and thank you, Foreign Secretary. It's a real honour to have you here at the CPS Theatre, especially since we originally booked you as Trade Secretary, but since your elevation, you have kindly kept the date.
Well, thank you very much, Rob, and it's fantastic to be here with you and CapEx and the CPS. And I think it's so important at this time when we are thinking about the future of our country, but globally, that we have freedom fighters like you and the CPS really making the case for free markets, for free speech, for free trade, and of course a free economy. So brilliant to be here.
Well, thank you so much. And given your new job, we thought we'd start with a little quiz. So on the screen behind me, we're going to show a series of national flags. All I want from you is the capital city, the name of the country, and the primary export. Okay with that? Any?
Well, all I can say is I've got an outfit to match every single one of them, Rob.
That is probably true. In all seriousness, it's an amazing job to do, but obviously there's a certain element of continuity for you. You were Trade Secretary. You dealt with lots of different countries. You've developed, and more than that, sort of developed an ethos about freedom, about trade, about democracy. And it feels from your remarks and your speech in the whole that's what you're going to take forward.
That's right. We're now in a position after 50 years of being in the European Union to really bring the full weight of our economic policy, our trade policy, our development policy, our diplomacy together to make a difference in the world. And I believe that we have the opportunity to be part of a network of liberty, as I described it, both increasing our economic influence with our like-minded allies, but backing that with serious security capability. And we've shown that we've done that with the AUKUS deal. We are developing those security links as well with nations like India, who are a key ally, with the broader Asia-Pacific region, with the Americas, and also with our European allies as well. So I think there is so much more we can do now that we have the full weight of international policy at our disposal. What I call the trade muscle that we haven't used for 50 years, but we are now showing what we can do. And of course, the Australia deal is the first from-scratch post-Brexit trade deal, and it shows the approach the UK is going to take, that we do believe in free trade. We believe in lowering barriers to trade with our allies. We believe in the power of ideas and innovation. We're not defensive as a country. We want to go on the offense, because we know that we have great products to sell, we have great services to sell, and also we want to work to bring more countries into our sphere of economic influence. I think that's a really important part of our overall foreign policy.
And of course, keeping to the age-old, time-honoured British value of screwing over the French.
Rob, I can't believe you said that. The French are an absolutely key ally of the United Kingdom. They are a fellow democracy, I think we'll all agree. And I note there's an election coming up in France very shortly. But they're also a country that believe in freedom. And of course, we want to work with the French alongside our other allies. But what we now have the opportunity to do as Global Britain is reach a lot more broadly and widely to a wider network. And we are in a unique position with our fantastic relationship with countries from Australia to Indonesia to Mexico to the Baltics to really form part of that network and be an advocate for those types of policies and push our allies to opening up more, because I think it's fundamentally important that in order that developing countries in particular shouldn't feel pressurized to accept infrastructure investment or to become economically dependent on autocratic regimes, that there are friendly, freedom-loving democracies that are prepared to do business and trade with them. And I think that's the way the UK can show others the way forward.
So that was actually going to be my next question. There's a word you haven't used yet, but which is kind of defined, like you're defining the network of liberty as in a positive sense, but you're also implicitly defining it against a certain other country, which is China. And we've seen today, I don't know if people have been following the news, apart from a global outage of WhatsApp and Instagram, which is obviously a first strike against Liz's social media capability, the Chinese have
Our adversaries have hit me hard with that, I can tell you. My umbilical cord was cut this afternoon when I couldn't get on WhatsApp.
I think the entire conference is descended into shambles. All those coffees which had to be rearranged. Seriously, I mean, we've seen today a fairly massive incursion of Chinese airplanes into Taiwanese airspace for another time. It obviously feels like tensions are rising in that region, and I think we've seen British ships going through the South China Sea. And what's your take on events there?
Well, of course, the UK is very keen to see peace maintained in the region, and we're working with allies to make that happen. And of course, the AUKUS deal is part of broadening the support in the area of nuclear-powered submarines to make sure that our allies have the resources and capabilities that they need. The broader point I was making in yesterday's speech is that ultimately it's going to be about building the network of economic strength that is important. That is what will drive a virtuous circle. The more trade we see between like-minded allies, the more infrastructure we see from friendly, honest, and reliable countries in the developing world, then that protects against autocratic regimes So I think that's a really important point, is that we need to operate from a position of strength. And the way we build strength and the way that we have a unique opportunity now to lead that work is through building those trade links, those economic links. Whether it's about supply chains, making sure that we have resilient supply chains, that they are, I quite like the term friendshoring, that we know we can rely on. And it's one of the things we found during the COVID crisis, is we were very reliant on single country supplies. And not just one country in a particular, single country supplies in general. And having that sort of broader resilience, making sure that we have secure supplies of critical goods is very important.
But I mean, you were one of the presiding spirits behind the UK's application to join the CPTPP, which we're all getting very good at saying now, and which is obviously has that it's an alliance of like-minded countries which believe in high trade standards. Interestingly, both China and Taiwan have applied to join it in the last few weeks. I mean, would you welcome either or both of those countries acceding to the CPTPP?
Well, I think it's a bit cheeky of the UK to say who should be in CPTPP before we've actually joined it, and we've crossed those hurdles ourselves. But we are making good progress, and of course the Australia deal was a key stepping stone to being part of CPTPP. The New Zealand deal is a key stepping stone, where Anne-Marie Trevelyan is now working on new deals with Mexico, with Canada, to make that happen. And we fully expect we will be able to accede to that agreement by the end of next year. And that is going to be hugely significant. We will be the first new member of TPP since it was established in 2018. And I note that since the UK has started its formal negotiations, everybody else is expressing interest in joining, including the countries you mentioned, but also the Philippines has expressed interest, Thailand has expressed interest. There are some elements of the US who have expressed interest in the US joining, although that is not the policy of the administration. So there is definitely heightened interest. And on this issue of which countries should be part of it, the point about CPTPP is it has very strict rules. It has strict rules on intellectual property. It has strict rules on the environment. It has strict rules on labor rights. It has strict rules on human rights. So if countries are prepared to change their system, so they are part of CPTPP, that's all to the good. And the fundamental problem with the World Trade Organization is it allowed new members to join while those members didn't follow the rules, as well as the rules not being tough enough. So you have the situation in the World Trade Organization where China is still designated, self-designated as a developing country. And you have other countries similarly that are designated as developing countries that shouldn't be. So the point about CPTPP is it's an agreement that puts in place very, very strong rules that mean it's good for free market democracies to operate in. And that's the kind of trading system that I want to see.
So that's something actually I wanted to ask you about. One of the features of your trade policy was bilateral deals, or sort of groups of like-minded countries, partly because of the sort of the WTO and co are not really fit for purpose anymore. But what we've also seen is China, in particular, investing huge amounts in the multilateral organisations. Not just the WHO, but not just the WTO, but the WHO, the ITU. If you look at the sort of list of the major global regulators, China is absolutely, the UN has really invested in this stuff. Is this something that Western democracies have missed a trick on?
We are very focused on making sure that multilateral organizations are headed in the right direction, but I don't think we should underestimate the challenge of reform. The WTO, which is the one I know most about, it's a tough body to reform. It needs complete agreement to be able to achieve those reforms. So, for example, the fisheries subsidies negotiations have been going on for ages. They've not yet completed. So the approach I favour is a twin-track approach. First of all, trying to reform these multilateral organisations, which I think is important, making sure that the people leading those organisations have the interests of democracies at their heart, and are certainly are capable of sustaining a world that supports democracy, which is important. But also, we do need to work with like-minded allies to challenge those organisations as well. And that's the importance of TPP.
So one question, so you in terms of your speech today and your general vision,
It was yesterday, actually.
So yesterday, sorry.
I'm so pleased to hear you were in the audience.
Time blurs to get time. I was time blurs together here. I'm really sorry. I did know that. I read it today. That's the reason. You've thrown me off completely now. So your devotion to freedom is obviously extremely admirable, but obviously there are countries which are not free, and yet which we still have to do business with. Saudi Arabia would be one example. Likewise, there are countries where we have tried to impose freedom or bring freedom, such as Afghanistan, and it hasn't really worked. How do you reconcile that? How do you deal with, if freedom is the lodestar of your foreign policy, what do you do about countries which are not free but we still have to deal with?
My core belief is that the more we trade with countries, the more those countries develop economically, the more over time, provided it's part of the right framework, the more over time those countries become wealthier, they generally become freer, they generally become greener, and it is a positive progression. Now, I'm a realist. I'm not saying that every country in the world should and can be like the United Kingdom. But what I think is positive, and we've seen this with global trade. We've seen that 1 billion people have been lifted out of poverty. We've seen some countries do extremely well. If you look at countries like Mexico or Malaysia that joined trade agreements that they have progressed significantly economically. So it's about moving the system in the right direction. It's about the UK promoting those values through what we do, but it is not about insisting that everybody operates in exactly the same way as us and has exactly the same standards as us. And that was, of course, one of the big motivations behind the Brexit vote, is we wanted to have sovereignty to make our own decisions. So I believe in a world of sovereign nations working together to gradually make the world more prosperous, which leads to fewer wars, less outward flow of migration, a cleaner planet, all of those things that are desirable. But we can't make the great the enemy of the good. And that is a fundamental principle for me.
So I was struck in your speech as well, your speech yesterday, by the fact that you made the connection between freedom abroad and freedom at home, in particular freedom of speech. Do you think the UK is becoming a less free country in terms of what you can say?
No, I don't. And I think if you compare the debate in the UK over some of the so-called woke agenda, it's not a word I particularly like, let's call it that, compared with the debate in other countries, actually, I think the debate here in Britain is freer. And, we are able to have those conversations in a way that is less pejorative and less divisive than it is elsewhere around the world. And I think that speaks to, our tradition of free speech and, reasoned debate and a free press. So that's all good. But I don't think we should be complacent. So I do concern myself about the creeping illiberalism that we are seeing from some sections of politics. I think it's depressing that Labour MPs essentially have to have security at their own conference. And I deprecate people of whatever view who are so intolerant that they're unwilling to listen to somebody else's point of view in a reasonable, rational way. Because I think that does cause problems. And if we look at our adversaries and the types of systems that we don't support, the authoritarian regimes around the world, they love nothing more than seeing elements of Western liberal democracy fighting with each other, rather than turning our efforts to promote, the ideas that have made our country hugely successful and a great place to live over generations. Arguing about things which are, in the general scheme of things, part and parcel of everyday life. Our adversaries love nothing more than to see that divisive debate going on. So,
in terms of domestic policy, obviously your eyes are now firmly fixed on the outside world, but occasionally stray into the domestic
I'm
sphere.
also a Women and Equality Minister as well, as you know, Rob.
Indeed. That was going to be the final section of questions. But you recently coined the phrase "little Tories" to describe the tribe you think the party should be appealing to. These are cost-conscious people. These are, they shop there, surprisingly good value. This isn't sponsored by Lidl, by the way. But they, and the type of people who might be a bit upset about about the fact that the energy bills are soaring, that their taxes are going up, that life seems to be getting a bit harder. And of course, you were one of the more few people apparently around the cabinet table who actually argued against or challenged and queried the new health and social care levy. Are the Tories in danger? Is life becoming too tough for those ordinary voters, and is government making it worse for them?
Well, I consider myself a little Tory who shops regularly there, along with all kinds of other shops as well.
This is where I asked a gotcha question about your favourite item
as a Yorkshire woman, I love a bargain.
So what's your favourite item from there?
Well, they do some very good wine, actually. Obviously, from my favourite countries like Chile and Australia, of course. Not to mention the brilliant English. I don't think I've ever successfully bought English sparkling wine at Lidl yet, but I will work on that. But when we get to 2024, or whenever the election is, and I'm not making any predictions, what people will care about is, do they feel their lives are getting better? Are the prospects in my area better? Are there opportunities? Are there job opportunities? Are the new enterprises thriving? Am I able to afford to buy more each week to feed my family? That's what most people think about when they come to elections. So I think we've got to have a laser-like focus on making sure that life is getting better for people. And we don't do that by the government command and controlling the economy. We do it by unleashing enterprise, by making it easier to set up a business. Free trade benefits people hugely. So for the poorest 10% of the population, if we didn't have trade with other countries, their net income would be cut. There was a report showing their net income would halve. That is what trade does. It brings in quality products at good prices that are affordable for people. It was the original insight that Robert Peel had when he abolished the Corn Laws, that it benefited manufacturing, it benefited working people across the country. So I think the Conservatives, we forget at our peril if we don't worry about how people will feel about their life, their opportunities, their income come 2024.
In terms of taxes, for you, is it thus far and no further?
Well, I am a low-tax Tory, and I was delighted to
everyone.
And the Chancellor is a low-tax Tory as well, and we want to bring down the tax burden. The best way to do that is to get economic growth going. And I've talked about what we've done on trade to get economic growth going. I'm very hopeful that Michael Gove is going to do some really exciting things at the Department of Levelling Up to reform our sclerotic planning system to get growth going. We need the free ports to bring more businesses into our country. This is how we are going to... There were some great CPS pamphlets on these very subjects, weren't there?
Well,
Rob has told me to copiously talk about everything the CPS are. It's a great organisation.
I was actually going to plug your proposals on childcare from the coalition, which Nick Clegg killed, which would obviously help enormously.
Well, that is another area where we can change our regulations to make life better for families across the country. And that's exactly, this is an unfrozen moment. Post-Brexit, post-COVID, that we can really think and do things differently. We have every possible tool at our disposal in a way we simply didn't have before. There are no excuses now. We're not part of the European Union. There's nobody else telling us what to do. So let's take that opportunity.
So, Liz, you said, I'm not going to recite your backstory because you've covered it before, but I was struck by one thing on your Wikipedia page. You said your parents were both...
The Wikipedia page is lies, Robert. I hope you haven't...
But your parents were both quite left-wing. Yes, and you said your dad felt he couldn't campaign for you when you started standing as a Tory. If that was the case, is that still the case?
I'm afraid it is still the case, yes.
Oh dear. I hate it when politics divides families. But no, I think there's going to be a lot of questions, so I'll throw to that. But with your women and equalities hat on, obviously one of the big stories this past week has been the murder of Sarah Everard, the facts which came out of the trial. Can you understand why people women are furious about this, and you can't quite understand why heads haven't rolled, why there hasn't been a kind of a call for fundamental change within the police?
I can completely understand that. I understand, that women feel unsafe walking around, particularly at night, and I do as a woman, and I think that's wrong. And I think we talked about how people need to have opportunities to control their own lives. That is why free societies, free democracies are so good, because we give people control of their own lives. They're in control of their own destiny. They have agency. And that is what breeds success. And that's why Britain has been successful. That's why America has been successful. But, what we're seeing is that women are being held back. If you're not able to go out because you're fearful, if you're worried about what people might do to you, that is is completely wrong, and it is bad for our whole society. And we do need reform in the police. We also need reform across the justice system. It's wrong that our rape conviction rate is so low, and it is wrong that it's taking so long for these cases to come to court. And it does need. I completely understand people's frustration with it.
Thank you very much, Liz. On which note, I think we should throw it open to questions. Please, put your hands up, and hopefully we have some roving microphones. Let's, in deference to Frank, who's been giving us tuitions on how best to run these things, let's start right at the back with that lady there. Oh, in fact, we don't actually have any. These are our only microphones, so I'm afraid I'm going to have to sacrifice my authority.
We can share, don't worry.
Hi, Liz. Thank you for joining us today. My name's Nina. I'm from Amnesty International. I work with the families of Nazanin Zaghari Ratcliffe, Anusha Shuri, and on behalf of Morad Tahbaz and Mehran Rauf. Following your recent trips to the UN, we were quite hopeful that under your leadership, the Foreign Office would be increasing pressure on the Iranian government to free and release British nationals arbitrarily detained in Iran. So it was slightly disappointing yesterday that you didn't mention this issue in your keynote speech. It's fair to say that the government's policy on releasing British nationals in Iran has failed to date. So just wondering what your strategy is to release nationals and have them reunited with their families in the UK. Thank you.
Well, it's completely wrong that the British nationals have been detained. And I spoke, in fact, to Nazanin last week, and I've also spoken to her husband, Richard, and to the families of the other British nationals that have been detained. I had a meeting with the Iranian foreign minister to urge the Iranians to move forward on this, and we are pushing as hard as we can. And what I'm interested in is what is effective and what works. And I can assure you that the Foreign Office team and I are working on this non-stop to get Nazanin and those other British nationals home.
Gerald, can you just collect a couple of questions at once, and we'll put them to Liz.
Just working. Hi, my name is Layla. I work for the Coalition for Global Prosperity. My question is, how important do you think development is in overall UK foreign policy? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Foreign Secretary. My question relates to the first half an hour of the discussion so far, where you've referred to foreign policy and trade interchangeably. My question to you is, do you think the Department of International Trade should be merged under the envelope of the Foreign Office?
I represent an NGO, so naturally I have to ask about the reduction of the foreign aid budget away from 0.7. The economic conditions under which we have discussed being able to return to 0.7 were established when the FCDO was under earlier management. Now that it's under your management, have we considered perhaps re-evaluating those conditions so that we can return to 0.7 sooner?
So I'll answer those three questions together. Development and trade and diplomacy are all, and defence, in fact, are all part of the UK's overall foreign policy. And the fact that we are able to have development as part of the FCDO, in my view, makes it a more powerful tool. And it enables us to work overall to what is the purpose of the policy? Well, it is to encourage development in other countries so that those countries are able to become independently sustained, and the citizens in those countries are able to lead better lives. That's ultimately the purpose. And when I was at Trade, we developed the Developing Countries Trade Scheme, which we're consulting on, which is all about making it easier for developing countries to trade with developed countries. Because at present, we're in a position where sometimes aid is given to developing countries, but there are trade barriers up. So we're giving with one hand and taking away with the other. So I think it's really important that our development policies work together with our trade policy and our broader foreign policy to promote that type of development that is going to result in long-term stability and prosperity in those countries. And my priorities for the development budget, first of all, are women and girls, because we know a society doesn't succeed if women and girls are held back. And we've talked about, the terrible situation around the Sarah Everard case here in Britain, and women feeling fearful. But of course, there are terrible plight of women who suffer female genital mutilation, who have rape used against them as a weapon of war, of girls who can't go to school. And if we allow that situation to continue, those societies will not improve, and they won't attain the prosperity and the security that we want to see. So that's a very important priority. The other really important priority for me is that we are able to use development funding to provide an alternative to countries who have become more dependent on authoritarian regimes. So that is something that I want to work on with our development budget, to make sure that's hand in hand with some of the infrastructure support that we're giving to developing countries. On the subject of the Trade Department, it's vitally important that we have a trade secretary as well as a foreign secretary. I know from doing the trade secretary job, it is a more than full-time job. We've negotiated more trade deals than any other country simultaneously. Anne-Marie Trevelyan has got a massive pipeline. She's doing the CPTPP negotiations, the India negotiations, she's doing the Gulf negotiations, Israel. And by the way, that's not the limit of it. There's a huge queue of countries wanting to do business with the UK. What I'm struck with everywhere I go in the world is that countries want a trade deal with Britain because we're a reliable partner, we're a trustworthy partner, we're the 5th biggest economy in the world, and they want to do business with us. So that is a full-time job. And of course, those trade secretaries in other countries want to deal with a cabinet minister. They want to deal with somebody who reports directly to the Prime Minister. And I think the US model is actually very good, which is you have the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who is responsible for the foreign policy, and then you have the US Trade Representative, Catherine Tai, who's responsible for trade negotiations. And we have to recognize that now we've left the European Union, there's a lot more foreign policy for us to do, because there's this whole area of policy which was previously done by DG Trade on our behalf. Some people might comment they took rather a long time to do anything. I think they've just reopened negotiations with India, actually rather soon after we started. We said we wanted to start negotiating with India, but that's been going on for 11 years. At least I think they're in year 4 of their negotiations with Australia. So we have taken on those responsibilities, and it's right that we have the commensurate number of cabinet ministers to deal with those responsibilities. But of course, I'm working very closely with Anne-Marie because trade is a really important part of foreign policy, as is defense and security. And I think there's a real opportunity to, as we build these trade relationships, as we build these infrastructure agreements around the world, as we build these security agreements, to make them more than the sum of their parts. So, Australia, we've now got a defense deal, we've got a free trade deal, we've got intelligence sharing. That's the kind of model I think we can build on.
That actually reminds me of something. Yeah, No, absolutely. You take control. You've taken back control of the interview. Actually, that reminds me of something I did want to ask earlier. I mean, which is a sort of machinery of government question, but hopefully sort of an interesting one. Does Europe count as foreign policy? So because obviously you've got David Frost dealing with the Brexit thing, but should the Foreign Office be taking the lead on Europe?
Well, Europe is part of foreign policy, of course it is, and I work very closely with David Frost.
But in a longer term, are we going to start treating Europe like all the other countries, or is there still a sort of special? Does it need more attention in terms of?
I'm sure if David were here, he would tell you there's a lot of work to be done on the TCA and the Northern Ireland Protocol.
Well, he's here tomorrow, so we can ask him then. Any further questions? Well, obviously there are further questions, but just yeah.
As you sort of start the new job as Foreign Secretary, who do you think is the best Foreign Secretary that went before you?
Boris Johnson.
Hi Liz, thanks for your time today. I'm really pleased to hear your commitment to women and girls. Just wanted to ask, what are your plans for actioning some of the other Conservative Party manifesto commitments from 2019? So for example, ending preventable deaths of mothers and newborn babies, and leading the way in eradicating Ebola and malaria.
Thank you. Hi, Liz. So the UK has had incredible, remarkable in terms of ensuring everyone in the UK gets vaccinated against COVID-19. But just as life is getting slowly back to normal here, only 2% of low-income countries have had access to a COVID-19 vaccine. I want to know what we can do more to ensure vaccine equity, which will not only help the poorest people, but also us here in the UK.
Sorry, if I can just add to that very quickly. And also, do you think that we should get that before we have third doses here, we should be giving first doses in developing countries?
Foreign Secretary, what will you be fighting the Treasury for at the spending review? And will it be a time when we see a third round of cuts to aid with things like special drawing rights, vaccine dose sharing and debt relief squeezed within the 0.5%?
So on the subject of vaccines, I'm immensely proud that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine was developed here in the United Kingdom. And the whole concept of intellectual property protection is very, very important, because that is what gives the incentive to innovators to produce these vaccines. And it's as a result of that innovation that we have been able, in record time, to come up with a vaccine to deal with this terrible global pandemic. So I'm very wary of some of the proposals that have come forward on the idea of an IP waiver, because in the short term, we don't know that it would actually solve the problem, and I don't think it will, and I'll say a bit more about what I think will deal with the problem. But secondly, you would then find future innovation would be stymied by abolishing or reducing that system of intellectual property rights. And I think intellectual property rights are a really important issue, and is one of my concerns, as I've said, with some of the behaviour of China in the trading system, is those violation of intellectual property rights, which undermines the basis of innovation and enterprise. What I've now visited, I think, I visited the Serum Institute in India, which is producing AstraZeneca vaccine, and last week I visited the AstraZeneca production in Mexico. So I think the best way of getting more vaccines out to the rest of the world is through licensing of production as close to market as possible, and I'm very keen to see more production in Africa, in particular, to see that happening. It's something that I was talking to Dr. Ngozi about the WTO about. How do we practically make that happen? Because this is complex technology, so we need to make sure the technology transfer is taking place. We need to make sure that we're able to get the skills in those production facilities. But that, to my mind, is the best way of getting vaccines out to the rest of the world is have more local production in those countries. And I know it's something AstraZeneca are working on, and we're talking to a number of the other pharmaceutical companies about that. Yes, on the questions of my negotiations with the Treasury, which I won't conduct in public, but I'm always talking to my colleagues at the Treasury and making them aware of the value for money provided by our budget. And no doubt once I've finished at conference, I will go into further discussions with them later this week.
And you can just tell them, take it from the trade budget. To be honest, we weren't really using it. You know,
I would never do that.
And on the, I think there was a third question as well about preventable deaths and in your women inequalities role.
Well, absolutely, and that is, you'll expect I'm working on exactly making sure that we are able to fulfill our commitments and that we are able to deliver those programs.
Thanks. And let's get another round. There's some people at the back who should be rewarded for their patience.
Thank you. James Somerville-Meikle from Canterbury and Catholics in the Conservative Party. Foreign Secretary, your speech yesterday and your comments today have focused very much on freedom. I was wondering what you could say about the UK's work to promote freedom of religion or belief under your stewardship of FCDO. We've had some really good recommendations from the Truro report about how to promote freedom of religion or belief. Some of those have been implemented, others have stalled somewhat. So some comments from you on that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. Eamon Ives from the CPS. Climate change, or action on climate change, is obviously a critical part of the new foreign policy. What will you be doing to hasten decarbonisation? And if I may ask, what are your thoughts on a potential carbon border adjustment mechanism as a way to encourage countries which aren't abiding with their Paris Agreement commitments to actually take more action?
Thank you, Foreign Secretary. James Cole from Stop AIDS. I was pleased to hear of your commitment for local production of COVID-19 vaccines. Building on that, I was interested to know your assessment of the World Health Organization's COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, otherwise known as the CTAP. It was a Conservative government in 2010 that established a medicines patent pool, which through voluntary licensing massively increased the production and lowered the prices of HIV medication. Will the UK show the same leadership and support the WHO to establish the CTAP?
Okay, great. You won't be able to read my handwriting. No, well, thank you. At least you've got a pen, Rob. Actually, maybe you gave me a pen.
You do have a pen,
So,
but you can borrow mine.
I'm very supportive of freedom of religion. It's a absolutely core freedom as far as I'm concerned, and happy to discuss it further with your organisation. I hope you've read the Green Trade Report, Mr. CPS, because that goes into exactly our views on carbon border adjustment mechanisms, which is the first best option is to get countries to agree to the net zero target. The second best option is to embed the externality of carbon leakage, as economists like to call it, in the global trading system. And the third best option is working to look at specific measures to deal with it. But the focus at present should be seeking global agreement to getting to the target. That's the best way of doing it, rather than having to have those adjustment mechanisms within the global trading system. But clearly, you know, if in the future you end up in a position where our manufacturers are being unfairly undermined because they're required to implement standards that other countries aren't, then there could be a case for a mechanism. But I would much rather it was multilateral rather than having lots of different unilateral adjustment mechanisms. And some of them can frankly be green protectionism and just an excuse for putting up tariffs with no real evidence. Obviously, I wouldn't accuse any of our close allies of doing such a thing.
And the CTAP. Yeah.
Sorry?
CTAP and the medicine pooling.
Yes, well, I think I very much agree with the gentleman who suggested that, you know, the answer is this voluntary licensing. I agree with that, and I'm happy to look in more detail about what he's proposed.
And can I just say that of all your accomplishments as a politician, deciphering my handwriting may be your greatest triumph to date, because no one else can do it. Another round of questions, please.
Thanks, Foreign Secretary. I just wanted to ask, with hindsight, do you think the US made a mistake by withdrawing troops from Afghanistan?
Liz, how long do you think it'll be before we get a trade deal with the States?
One of the criticisms of the foreign aid budget usage before it was merged into the FCDO was about using aid in countries where there were human rights abuses, such as, you know, China with the Uyghur Muslims and other countries maybe with nuclear or space programs or whatever. Will you, now it's under your remit, be removing aid to countries that don't meet our diplomatic and other standards?
So I'll start with the issue of the US trade deal. As I pointed out, Anne-Marie Trevelyan has already got a very, very long pipeline of trade deals she's negotiating. Of course, I'm sure if the United States were ready to negotiate a trade deal, that she would be ready to do that. But there are plenty of other opportunities out there. India in particular is a massive opportunity. And what's particularly advantageous about a trade deal with India is that they do have very high tariffs and barriers. So getting preferential access to that market is a really exciting opportunity for the UK, in particular a digital and data agreement. But what I think is important is that the US does look to trade more broadly, you know, including with the UK, and lower its barriers to like-minded allies. So that's something I would like to see happen. But obviously that's a sovereign decision for the United States. And I was also asked about their Afghanistan withdrawal. Again, you know, I'm a great believer in sovereignty of countries, and we have to deal with the world as it is, and we have to deal with the decisions that our partners make, and we have to make our decisions on that basis. And certainly it's the case that given the US was leaving Afghanistan, it wasn't a viable proposition for us to remain. And we need to deal with the world as it is, and we now need to move forward, and we are working with allies across the world to stabilize the situation in Afghanistan, ensure it doesn't fall into a humanitarian crisis and it doesn't become a hotbed for terrorism. Oh, you've started improving your writing for me.
Yeah, large capital letters.
I mean, on this thing about aid and standards, I mean, this is the principle should be that we are funding development and we are also trading with countries in a way that advances the welfare of those countries, but also protects the principles that we believe in as a freedom-loving democracy. Now, there's obviously quite a lot of nuance and areas of grey in that, so I'm reluctant to sort of put an absolutely clear line, but the fundamental principle is we certainly shouldn't be giving aid that actually undermines the values we believe in, because that is not good in the long term for that country or the people living in that country. It's why I think we've got to be very careful with things like sanctions, because sanctions can be effective, but on the other hand, they can sometimes benefit an autocratic regime at the expense of ordinary citizens and businesses. So with any policy, including foreign policy, you've always got to be very careful about the unintended consequences of what you do. So I think it's a very nuanced question, And I think it's hard to answer in the abstract, but that's the fundamental principle that I think lies behind it.
And a special guest question from our special guest, Dr. Frank Luntz. And also, actually, Michael, if there's anything you want to ask as well, given that you're our chairman, and you know, you get the prerogative.
Do you personally believe in the special relationship between the UK and the US?
Foreign Secretary, I spent a lot of time in Africa. I was brought up in Africa. I have a great affection for Africa. Indeed, I have a house in Africa, in East Africa. Africa is increasingly important for our relations internationally. Can you talk about a little bit about your view and your strategy as regarding that continent?
So ending on two very interesting questions. I believe in us having a very close relationship with the United States. They're clearly a key ally that share our values, our worldview. What I'd say, though, is there are other allies too. So Australia, for example, a country I think we're becoming increasingly close to. Japan is an extremely important ally. I won't list all the allies I listed in the speech, but you know, when I talked about the network of liberty, what I meant was, as well as working very closely with the United States, we need to be reaching out to other allies, and so do the United States, because we are not going to challenge autocratic regimes simply with a few relationships. This is about working together with all of our friends and allies across the world, and that's a really important principle. So yes, it's a special relationship, but it's not an exclusive relationship, and I think the AUKUS deal is a very good example of that. On the subject of Africa, one of the things we promoted at the Trade Department is trade deals with Africa, and you know, we struck trade deals with Ghana and with Kenya and with South Africa, and I think there's more to be done on that front with Africa, and I know the Trade Secretary is very interested in that. And the point I was making about development in general, and particularly infrastructure support, you know, making sure there is clean, reliable infrastructure funding coming from countries that are honest and where there aren't the wrong strings attached is very important for the future development of Africa.
But presumably you'd say include private investment there as well as public investments?
Absolutely, yes.
So as Liz said, that this is the end of our show. So one last question for you, Liz. Let's imagine it's a year's time. We're back in Birmingham, I think it is again.
Blackpool, please.
Blackpool,
please.
Wow. God, that's...
Honestly, we need to go back to the seaside. I'm sorry.
I don't know. I had a really bad hotel last time we were in Blackpool. But, Liz, let's say we're here in a year's time in Blackpool, and we've all got great hotels because we've leveled up. What would you...
We're in a chip shop. This is what I'm about.
Chip shop with the CPS and CapEx logos hastily spray painted on the side. What do you want to be boasting about? What do you want to be saying? Like, imagine you're doing a fringe event with us again. What would you want to be saying? In the past year, I, Liz Truss, in my job as Foreign Secretary, have delivered the following things for this country.
Well, I won't be able to reveal all of them because some of them will be surprises, Rob. But what I want to do...
So nuking France.
What I want to do... I'm going to ignore that. What I want to do is advance our networks. So whether it's new security agreements, I think we've got opportunities with countries like India, with Canada, with Japan. Whether it's working on new economic arrangements that go beyond trade into areas like infrastructure financing. I want to make positive progress on those fronts. And also, I will be saying more tangibly about what we're doing on women and girls, particularly on our development spending.
Well, Liz, thank you so much for joining us. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in giving a big round of applause to Foreign Secretary and Minister for Women and Equalities. And please join us here in the CPS Theatre tomorrow for another extraordinary range of panels, including In Conversations with Lord Frost and Jacob Rees-Mogg. Thank you.